People are working harder to put food on the table. People are working harder to afford to send their kids to college, right? Where is the response among the moderates to solving those problems? And I think that then opens the door for far left, far right on both sides of the party.
People are frustrated about the lack of change that they're seeing and the fact that their prices keep going up. The American dream is slipping away.
Is the candidate they should fear most from the right a guy called Tucker Carlson?
No.
Hello and welcome to TrumpWorld. I'm Matt Frei, coming to you again from London. Anushka is still on holiday, I'm happy to report. It's no surprise that Donald Trump is a communications maverick and, frankly, a bit of an expert. From the late-night, all-caps true social posts to the bombastic speeches and his use of anger and, yes, humour, Trump really has a unique way of talking to his followers. I remember the first time I went to a Trump rally before his first election at the end of 2015. It was a school kind of sports hall in North Carolina, which is a swing state at the time. And the capacity was 6,000. He packed it with about 10,000 people. So there were thousands who couldn't get in. And a lot of them had come to see this new candidate called Trump. Of course, they all knew him from television. He was a celebrity. But the way he communicated with them, the way he kind of channeled their anger and frustration about politics at the time, the colourful use of language, the expletives, I mean, all that was just extraordinary. It wasn't high rhetoric. It wasn't the Gettysburg Address, but it worked. But actually, although Trump seems to be unique, he does come from a long line of outsiders who've used communications in a similar way, who've disrupted the way that politicians talk to their voters. Remember Ronald Reagan's intimate, relaxed, very sort of silky style? Listen.
How often we read of a husband and wife, both working, struggling from paycheck to paycheck to raise a family, meet a mortgage, pay their taxes and bills.
What about Barack Obama's nonchalance or coolness? Yes, intellectual, but also just pretty cool.
I have no more campaigns to run. My only agenda, I know because I won both of them.
History is full of politicians who found a knack of cutting through in their own unique way. In fact, you could say that in America, unless you find that authentic voice and you have that journey that somehow gels with the electorate at the time, you just won't make it all the way to the White House. But looking at Trump in particular, do you think that he's changed political communications for good? And has he finally forced the left to also up their game? Well, to discuss all this, I'm joined by Daniel Kreiss, Professor of Political Communication, as well as the Democratic strategist Ameshia Cross, who used to work for Barack Obama. Welcome to you both. Do you think that the way that campaigning happens at the moment, with posts on social media, etc., has formed President Trump, or has Trump formed social media? Is he the perfect social media candidate? Daniel.
Well, I think what Trump has done extremely effectively is tell a simple story, and has been able to tell that very simple story perfectly adapted for an age of social media. So it's both the communication strategy and the narrative as it fits the media environment of the moment.
Right. So if you have a short attention span and you don't like doing too much homework, then a little post on social media is perfect.
Well, let's be more fair to electorates around the world, right? Like, people have busy lives, right? They're taking care of their children. They're taking care of aging parents. They're working sometimes 2 jobs, right? People don't have a ton of time to spend consuming political news and information. So yes, their attention spans are shorter because they have many more important things in their lives. But also what happens on social media often radiates outward beyond that. And I think that is also something that Trump did really brilliantly in the 2016 campaign. He realized that one post on Twitter would drive the entire media cycle on CNN and in the New York Times. And he used that as a platform to then break through the many different fragmented platforms and many different fragmented attention spans that we have in the American electorate.
Ameshia, I covered President Obama. I interviewed him once, and I remember I was so impressed in the first election that brought him to power, how he used not social media, but the internet at the time to get lots of supporters and lots of small donors. So you went to one of these Obama rallies, they would ask for your internet address, your email details, and then they would hit you up for money over and over again. And a lot of people, would give $10, $15, $20. And of course, it gave him lots of money, but also broadened his base. And of course, we all remember his wonderful speeches. He was a great orator. Can you imagine Barack Obama being really effective on X, or on TikTok? Or is he just too much of a rhetorician to allow himself to be brought down to one little phrase?
Full disclosure, I worked on the Obama campaign. I was in communications there and served as communications advisor. What this narrative fails to really lean in on is the early aughts of social media were actually under Obama, not under Trump. And he actually captivated and got more young people involved in organizing, getting on the streets, carrying the signs, carrying his message in a way that no elected had done before, based on virtual assembly and getting people to care and getting them to acknowledge this. It was Facebook. It was the early aughts of Twitter. Obviously, Instagram was really a thing during his first administration, but it really, took shape during the second. I think that Obama, to his credit, is somebody who always knew how to speak to young people. And if you know how to speak to young people and you know where young people are, the majority are going to be on YouTube. They're going to be on Twitter. They're going to be on TikTok. Then you adapt your messaging for that space. Barack Obama can turn his long prose into short prose. He is a communications guy. He understands the field. What him and Trump have that is very different is that Trump was also a showman. Trump was a guy who came out of production. Trump was a guy who was a TV guy. He did what most people in TV have been doing for quite some time. But he is somebody who has a production quality that I think is very different from your average elected leader because of the TV background he brought to it.
But you can imagine Barack Obama campaigning effectively, let's say in this election year, out there, if he was still on the stump, he was still running as a candidate, you can totally imagine him up against someone like Trump or against someone like Mamdani.
I think that Trump would love to say he ran against Barack Obama, and that's a dream that he really wants to have. Unfortunately, in this space, it will never occur. However, Barack Obama would definitely be able to do it in this avenue. Again, you adapt to the new tools that are available. There are too many people who are older candidates. Barack Obama, again, is not nearly as old as Donald Trump. Who are not as adept to where the people are. You have to understand where the people are, but also the types of messages that resonate with them. Because he always has his ear to the streets and his attention and pulse on those individuals and is going into the community. Being in the community often helps you to take those messages. One of the reasons why DC officials have a very hard time is because the majority of them are so far removed from the everyday experiences of Americans that it becomes a whole lot harder to be able to create that message. It's not just a medium. It is always the message. If your message is not resonating, you are done.
Right. Daniel, if you look at American presidents in recent memory, a lot of them have ended up in the Oval Office, having started off as rank outsiders. So I'm thinking, going back all the way to Ronald Reagan. I know he was the governor of California, but he was also an actor. And a lot of people, especially in Europe at the time, were raising a few eyebrows at the idea that an actor could hold the highest office in the land. Bill Clinton, was a bit of an outsider, but again, he got there because he was eventually he was very good, with words. Barack Hussein Obama, as Donald Trump likes to say, was an outsider. Even George W. Bush, although he was a Bush, was not the favored son to go to the Oval Office. So what is it about outsiders that manage to break through and get themselves elected? And how much is that down to their ability to tell a particular story, given the means available for them at the time?
Yeah. Okay. I think that's a wonderful point, right? So, I think one thing it enables someone from the outside to do is run against Washington, right? And to tell a story about all these elite, unelected or elected officials who are taking hard-earned taxpayers' money, who, as Ameshia put it, are out of touch with the struggles that everyday Americans have to put food on the table, to provide for their children, whatever that might be. So coming from that outside gives you that fresh face. It gives you a blank slate that people can then project their hopes and their fears onto. And I think to your point, if you look before Barack Obama, there was Howard Dean, right? And the one thing that the internet really enabled candidates to do is to harness and mobilize popular energy and turn that into resources, whether that was money, whether that was attention, whether it was energy to go door to door, but it enabled candidates to mobilize energy and enthusiasm.
And you've got to be able to tell a story. And I wonder, Ameshia, whether you think that actually attention is now more important than competence?
Unfortunately, yes. I think that there are candidates that we see who are actually gaining the most traction on the ground are often the most competent. We've seen long-standing elected leaders who have held positions at the state level, the local level, and the federal level not stand a chance against people who we didn't know their policy positions yesterday. I think that being popular helps you. Being someone who is a strong orator helps you. Being someone who can get your message across in the way that people feel it is going to help you. Unfortunately, for a lot of individuals who've been in this space for so long, and by this space I mean politics, there is they're kind of like a way of doing things, a lay of the land. And you get so used to the mechanization of that it becomes frustrating for people on the ground. That is what we're seeing from people like those DSA candidates. That is what we're seeing. The non-self-proclaimed democratic socialists, but people who are running, who are giving you policy solutions that Congress hasn't used before, that we have not heard on the ground before, who are willing to take that hand instead of operating with the same ingredients that we've seen over and over again. Those are the types of people folks want to see because they're tired of the status quo. I don't care whether you're left or the right now. People are frustrated about the lack of change that they're seeing and the fact that their prices keep going up. The American dream is slipping away to a professor made. They can't, take care of their children. These are realities. And there are people who are running with those realities in mind.
So that's important to remember, isn't it? So it's the reason why Zohran Mamdani, as a proud self-declared democratic socialist Muslim, is mayor of the citadel of global capitalism. That is still something that you have to get your head around. But the reason why he's able to do that is partly because of his style, his ability to grab everyone's attention, and also his message fits into the current landscape where people are frustrated and want to find a way out. So is that it's the perfect melding of message and means, if you like. Ameshia.
No, absolutely. Would that have worked 10 years ago, 5 years ago? Absolutely not. I think that you have to build your campaign and your message for the moment you're in. What we see with too many candidates is they want to keep doing the same thing over and over again, recycling that message, especially those who've been in office for a long time, instead of adapting to what the people are saying on the ground. They're crying out, and they're crying out loudly. And to a point you made earlier, social media and digital gives us the opportunity to see how they feel in real time. So if you're not the town halls, log on to YouTube, log on to X, log on to Threads, TikTok, whatever you need to do. They are being loud and very vocal on all of those outlets and telling you exactly how they feel, how their lives have shifted significantly. And if you're not the person who can meet the needs or even make a bridge to address their concerns, you're dead in the water.
Okay, and Daniel, do you think that's sort of what Ameshia's just described brilliantly? That works better in a primaries campaign, where you're dealing with rival candidates from the same party in a seat that is, Michigan is different, but in those New York seats are always going to be Democrat, right? So you're dealing with an internal party competition. And actually, if you're using all those things that she just described, you win that seat and then you win it in the general election. Is that what's happening, especially in the primary cycle, which we're going to go through now?
Well, I think the important thing is exactly what Ameshia pointed out, right? Which is that there's a clear story. And I would add to that, it's often a clear moral story. If you look at Mamdani, if you look at Trump, the left and the right, the most powerful stories that we have in politics at our time are the ones that tell a story about what's right or wrong, and what we should do, and then what someone is going to do once they're in power. So I think the story within the Democratic Party now is that battle over are two different stories. One, which is coming from the left, which says, look, things are hard out there and they shouldn't be this way. And we need to do something about it. And here's what we're going to do once we get into power. Right. And then that story will then shift in a general election to then critique the other side's version for what they would do if they were in power. So I think the story shifts based on who the primary audience is.
Okay, so apply this all to Michigan. This is a very, very important Senate primary. Whoever wins, the Democrats need to win that seat in order to hold on, to have a chance of getting the Senate in November. And tell us about, the battle between Abdul al-Said and Haley Stevens, because they're very different types of candidates, aren't they? But they also have a particular way of approaching the voters on social media in their own way that's quite sort of folksy and distinct. Daniel, you first.
Well, I think every candidate tries to make them. So you start with the story ultimately that you want to tell, what your campaign is about, and then how that's linked to your particular biography, right? And then that story then becomes that story that you're going to do. What am I going to do once I am in power? The thing is like people also have biographies, right? So that story also has to fit in a way that voters are going to understand to be authentic to their own particular biographies. And I think Ameshia said this earlier, right? Is like where people come from, what their backgrounds are really matter with respect to how the audiences then perceive the authenticity of those stories. And I think one thing that we're seeing across the country now is that the story of the outsider, right, because they have not been involved in governance to the same extent, does seem to have more credibility if you're going to tell a story of a change election to riff off of what Ameshia just said.
Okay, and so applying that to Michigan, because outside the left candidate has not been in politics, but Hadley Stevens, correct me if I'm wrong, I think has been a sort of 4-term US Congresswoman. She's seen as part of the Democratic establishment even before she's opened her mouth, whereas this guy, the other guy, is a newcomer.
Exactly. It's hard to run as a change agent in a change election if you have a long
Kamala
record
Harris,
in office.
you know,
Right?
She had that problem
Right.
too, right? So, okay. So this is another question which I'm fascinated by. And especially it comes up with Trump. My thesis is that it is better to be authentically mean or bad than to be inauthentically good. So what people like about Trump is that, you know, he is what you see. You know, what you see is what you get, and all that kind of stuff. I hear that over and over again. Okay, he's not a nice guy. I wouldn't want him looking after my kids or my dog at the weekend. But you know, but he doesn't. He's not afraid to punch through. And actually, and then you get Hillary Clinton back in the day. Remember Hillary Clinton, who was super smart, had all this experience, had all the competence, if you like, but not much of the attention, and it didn't work. And again, apply that to today, Ameshia.
I would argue that is a very narrow view of how it worked. America has long had an issue with females in power, specifically females at the highest rungs of political power. So that
but I'm not. Yes, no, I grant that, and it's amazing that you've never had a female president. But I'm just saying, on this particular level of authenticity, you know, let's talk about authenticity and how you bring it across in your communications.
Well, I think all candidates strive to be authentic. What may be authentic to you may not be authentic to somebody else, but all candidates will strive to win. So if your authenticity and your formal self is not something that's sailing on the ground, any good comms person is going to talk to you about how you can include a different narrative, how you can add personal stories or stories of people you've met on the campaign trail, how you can make your story seem more, pop. For lack of a better term, for individuals who may receive their message a different way. We all have personal experiences, walks of life that have shaped us. Well, some may resonate with some people where others just may not. I think that one of the issues we're seeing in Michigan with Haley Stevens is that she's been in Congress for a minute. She is trying to continue to align herself to the, ghost of Barack Obama past to try to get the black vote out there. But she is not able to meet the moment of today. Her campaign would have been great in 2014. It's 2026.
So, and why is that?
Themselves is entirely different. Large part because it showcases you're not listening to what they're saying. Michigan has one of the most diverse voter bases in the entire country. One of the reasons why it is a battleground state is because it has the inner city, it has rural areas, it has a composite of a lot of suburban areas, it has a lot of immigrant populations who have been here for quite some time. It also has a very large schism between the black and white community. There is a tightrope you have to walk in a state like this, and El has done it near perfectly.
Right, and that's a really interesting point. So is it possible to be authentic to yourself, to your own journey as a politician, while also at the same time speaking to so many different electorates? I mean, that's a really tough one to square, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's why communications is such a strong and vital part of anybody's campaign. In large part, any politicians, no matter who they are, you become a shapeshifter for the demographic you are trying to reach. That doesn't mean that your policies change. It does mean the way you message those policies change, because the way that black people experience Detroit is entirely different from the way the white people experience Detroit.
Yeah.
The way that immigrant communities have experienced some of the Trump rhetoric is entirely different from the way that people who've only read it in the paper have experienced it. So you have to be able to talk to all of those communities at the same time. And I think that it is, again, a very difficult thing, but it is something that if you're going to be in the public square, you're going to be an elected official, you damn well better figure out how to make that work.
Just to dig down to that a little bit, I mean, Hillary Clinton, as far as I remember covering her campaign, was very good at, or thought she was very good at talking to lots of different constituencies, white women, black women, black men, Hispanics. She tried all of it, right? And plus she had the experience and and the competence. And it didn't work. It was a bit like her, I don't know if you remember her iPod list. It had like a bit of country western, a bit of heavy metal, a bit of soul, a bit of blues, a bit of soft rock. It had a bit of everything. And at the end of the day, the authenticity of the candidate is lost. Whereas Trump did not try to appeal to that many people. He just appealed to just, I don't know, their anger or a sense of frustration. And it worked. So what's the secret sauce here for an aspiring politician? Ameshia.
Well, do it right now, especially again some of those younger upstarts. I will say that after the Trump electing cycle, not only in 2016 but also in 2024, there are more and more people on all sides of the aisle taking into consideration you've got to be a mirror of what people all say in the street. So it's not just policy notions that you want to get passed; it's also how they feel. But taking advantage of that frustration is what got him in. And I think that a lot of people now are looking at folks on the ground and the frustration they're speaking about with their own personal economies, and they are running on those things. Affordability is, folks, it's a reality. And if it's a part of your campaign and your strategy for communicating, you're going to be in a much better place.
Daniel, do you think that the internet and social media have killed moderation, have killed the moderate candidate in American politics?
I don't think it's killed a moderate candidate in American politics. I mean, I think a big part of the challenge is social media and the media ecosystems we're in today do select for engagement, and engagement gets built around emotion, right? And it gets built around extremes, and it gets built around amplifying those things, et cetera. But I think Ameshia is exactly right in terms of the bigger story, which is, I think one challenge is that center politicians, moderate politicians, haven't come up with whatever narrative that they're going to do in terms of telling that story that reaches the American public where they are. And if you sort of look across decades, things are more precarious now than they were 20 years ago. People are working harder to put food on the table. People are working harder to afford to send their kids to college, right? Where is the response among the moderates to solving those problems? Right? I haven't heard those policy ideas. I haven't heard those effectively delivered in a way that actually moves people. And I think that then opens the door for, right, the far left, far right on both sides of the party.
But, Daniel, we have, America went through some very tough times in the 60s, and in the 70s. And you elected, John F. Kennedy, who was not an extremist. You elected, Jimmy Carter, who was not an extremist. You elected,
considered extremist when he ran. By today's, absolutely not. But in the
Kennedy,
60s, really considered extreme. Yes.
Really, in the same way as Trump has been considered extreme.
The definition has changed over time, but at the time that he ran, he was considered extreme. Just like at the time MLK marched, yes, he has great resonating power today. But at the time, he was considered an extremist from both the right and the left. Like, we have totally set how we be.
So just the definition of what is extreme has changed, is what you're saying. Daniel, do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. And I should be clear here. I don't think moderate is necessarily where anyone needs to be. Like, I'm not celebrating moderate, right?
Yeah.
And I think Ameshia said this earlier before, which is to say that, like, policy ideas can come from many different places across an ideological spectrum. And what ideas actually meet the moment when it comes to being responsive to the American people and their foremost concerns. I think we shouldn't necessarily celebrate moderate for moderation's sake if maybe we need more radical change. And by the way, and I think this is important, Ameshia said this earlier, right? Like, Barack Obama was a radical change for that particular moment in time of the financial crisis, but also electing the first Black president of the United States. I think that's exactly what that country needed for that moment.
Right. Okay. So it's important about the particular moment. A couple of more questions, short ones. Do you think it's possible to prevail as a quiet politician in America, in the year 2026? Ameshia, you first.
No, absolutely not. I think that you can be quiet in your personal life. I'm not saying everybody needs to go out here and make TikTok videos every day, but I am saying that people want to be able to resonate with you. They want to be able to feel like they know who you are. That's not done by you getting in and being invisible. If that occurs, you will not get reelected. If it occurs during the election cycle, you're going to get lost in, the barrage of other people who are running. You have to have a presence that resonates with individuals, but also that seeks loudly for you.
Yeah.
That's how you bring on other demographics.
But by quiet, I don't mean a Trappist monk. I mean someone like Biden, right? Who didn't talk that much. And when he talked, it was not exactly fireworks. He did win the 2020 election at a difficult time.
We were also in the backdrop of a pandemic, and he was somebody seemed very much like he had the experience. He worked with the Obama administration. He was his VP. They had a crisis management and relief system that the president at the time, Donald Trump, ignored and threw away once he got in. There was a for competency when the world was literally on fire.
Right. So competency was more important than attention.
Yes.
For Biden.
The whole world was shut down, and all of us can't leave. Yes, people want competency.
Again,
happen outside of a crisis.
It was a particular moment in time. Okay, so final question. Can a democratic socialist, Daniel, win the presidency of the United States?
In terms of a democratic socialist, I mean, look, there's a lot of debate about what that means. Do I think a candidate who makes an appeal primarily based on class and basically proposes that government can create a fairer, more equitable United States? Do I think a candidate who endorses that can win? Yes.
Ameshia, whoever the Democrats choose as their nominee in the next presidential, is the candidate they should fear most from the right a guy called Tucker Carlson?
No. I think that Tucker Carlson's resonating power is with a slice of the digital audience, but he thus far has not proven himself to be a kingmaker on the right, and he is quite frankly still holding a grudge that his power with Donald Trump went under after he got fired for Box. So no, absolutely not. He is
really okay. Danny, would you bury Tucker Carlson the way that Ameshia's just done as a potential presidential nominee?
I mean, I think it's going to come from Trump's Republican Party, and I don't think Tucker Carlson's a part of that.
Right. J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio. I mean, they're going to try someone who's got a bit of spark,
I think that's where the likely candidates would come from. Yeah.
Okay. Ameshia, final one to you. A democratic socialist as president of the United States. I know Zohran Mamdani can't run because he wasn't born in the US, but if he could, and he had been, would he win? Could he win?
In America, anything is possible. And when Americans feel like their back is up against the wall economically, they make choices that they probably wouldn't have made outside of that. What democratic socialists have going for them, and non-avowed democratic socialists, Democrats who are running on a platform that sounds similar to that, is that they are speaking to the needs of an American public that does not see itself in the American dream anymore.
But I'd get back to my earlier point. I remember seeing Obama when he was launching The Audacity of Hope. He was at a book event in New Hampshire, in an all-white audience. He was the only black face in the audience, and they went nuts for him. I mean, there were people standing on tables. This was a book launch, for goodness sake. I mean, it was probably more than that to him. But you suddenly think, this guy, he's got something that the others don't have. And I had a similar experience with Trump in 2015. So it's who's that crazy outsider that we don't reckon on right now?
America just has to be at a point where they want significant change. More than the person, it is where the country is and the tempo of the people who are voting. They were at a point where they wanted to have a significant change. And I'm not sure that we leave that point anytime too soon. By all markers, healthcare is, something that's inaccessible. Food is something that is inaccessible. Energy costs, housing, name it. And I don't think that is alleviated in one election cycle. So we're going to see people who want change agents and radical change for the next election cycles.
We're in an insurrectionist mood, and we want every election to be a change election. And then sometimes we get the change and sometimes we don't. Or maybe too much change. Anyway, going to leave it there. Thank you so much. Ameshia Cross, Daniel Kreiss, thank you very much. That was really interesting. So that was Daniel Kreiss and Ameshia Cross, both with their actually rather similar perspectives, but still nuanced perspectives on what makes effective communication in the modern era. Whether we all have to be a little bit like Trump in order to get to the highest office. And how much the rules of the game have changed. And if there's one lesson I can take away from their analysis, from what they both had to say, is that your authentic voice, your ability to communicate, has to be embedded in the period and the mood of the day. You've got to read that room. Obama read that room very effectively as a change agent of hope. Hope and change, hope, that was the big thing, which he was then made fun of later on about that. But it worked at the time. It worked for his election. And of course, for Trump, he was able to channel frustration and anger and did so again in the last election in 2024. But what about the next candidate? What about the next Republican and Democrat? Do they have to be from the fringes of the party in order to capture the entire electorate? Or do you pivot back to the kind of slightly more boring, milquetoasty center ground? We'll wait and see. Everything in America is true and the opposite, as someone once said. And nothing can be predicted at this stage, even for the midterms in November. Anyway, that's something that we'll discuss on many occasions, either me alone in the next one or with Anushka when she comes back from her long and well-deserved holiday. I'm not jealous at all. That's it from TrumpWorld. I'm Matt Frei. Thanks for listening. See you next time.